Welcome to Tales by Candlelight, the video series in which I read your favourite, mostly Gothic, short stories, poems, and extracts from longer works. You let me know what you think in the comments, and I treat you to a full-length analysis video over on our main Books and Cats channel. Tonight, we're indulging in an extract from the Gothic masterpiece that is Angela Carter's 1979 story, The Bloody Chamber, a cacophonous, baroque nightmare that's sure to leave you in equal parts dazzled and horrified. I'd fully recommend reading the whole thing at your leisure, but for context, this is the part of the story where the protagonist is lying next to her husband in bed. He's just taken her virginity, and he's about to get a call that will take him away from their abode for a while, and he entrusts to her his set of keys and says, yeah, explore the whole castle, do what you like, just don't enter this one room. I'll give you the key, but don't unlock the door. If you know what's awaiting the protagonist on the other side of the door, you know. If you don't, well, I won't spoil the horror. Before we begin, a quick thank you to our patrons over on Patreon and channel members here on YouTube for supporting Books and Cats and our Tales by Candlelight series. And a quick warning that this story contains depictions of abuse, suggestions of sexual and domestic violence, and scenes of a sexual nature. And with that, please, settle into your seat, close down your eyes, and ignore the horseman rapping at the door, and enjoy the reading. I was brought to my senses by the insistent shrilling of the telephone. He lay beside me, felled like an oak, breathing stertorously, as if he had been fighting with me. In the course of that one-sided struggle, I had seen his deathly composure shatter like a porcelain vase flung against a wall. I had heard him shriek and blaspheme at the orgasm. I had bled. And perhaps I had seen his face without its mask, and perhaps I had not. Yet I had been infinitely dishevelled by the loss of my virginity. I gathered myself together, reached into the cloisonné cupboard beside the bed that concealed the telephone, and addressed the mouthpiece. His agent in New York. Urgent. I shook him awake and rolled over on my side, cradling my spent body in my arms. His voice buzzed like a hive of distant bees. My husband who, with so much love, filled my bedroom with lilies until it looked like an embalming parlour. Those somnolent lilies that wave their heavy heads, distributing their lush, insolent incense reminiscent of pampered flesh. When he'd finished with the agent, he turned to me and stroked the ruby necklace that bit into my neck, but with such tenderness now that I ceased flinching, and he caressed my breasts. My dear one, my little love, my child. Did it hurt her? He's so sorry for it. Such impetuousness. He could not help himself. You see, he loves her so. And this lover's recitative of his brought my tears in a flood. I clung to him, as though only the one who had inflicted the pain could comfort me for suffering it. For a while, he murmured to me in a voice I'd never heard before, a voice like the soft consolations of the sea. But then he unwound the tendrils of my hair from the buttons of his smoking jacket, kissed my cheek briskly, and told me the agent from New York had called with such urgent business that he must leave as soon as the tide was low enough. Leave the castle? Leave France? And we'll be away for at least 6 weeks. But it's our honeymoon. A deal, an enterprise of hazard and chance involving several millions lay in the balance, he said. He drew away from me into that waxwork stillness of his. I was only a little girl. I did not understand. And, he said, unspoken to my wounded vanity, I have had too many honeymoons to find them in the least pressing commitments. I know quite well that this child I've bought with a handful of coloured stones and the pelts of dead beasts won't run away. But after he'd called his Paris agent to book a passage for the States next day, just one tiny call, my little one, we should have time for dinner together. And I had to be content with that. A Mexican dish of pheasant with hazelnuts and chocolate. Salad, white, voluptuous cheese. A sorbet of muscat grapes and asti spumante. A celebration of Krug exploded festively, and then acrid black coffee in precious little cups so fine it shadowed the birds with which they were painted. I had Cointreau, he had cognac in the library, with the purple velvet curtains drawn against the night, where he took me to perch on his knee in a leather armchair beside the flickering log fire. He had made me change into that chaste little poiré shift of white muslin. He seemed especially fond of it. My breasts showed through the flimsy stuff, he said, like little soft white doves that sleep, each one with a pink eye open. But he would not let me take off my ruby choker, although it was growing very uncomfortable, nor fasten up my descending hair, the sign of a virginity so recently ruptured that still remained a wounded presence between us. He twined his fingers in my hair until I winced. I said, I remember, very little. The maid will have changed our sheets already, he said. We do not hang the bloody sheets out of the window to prove to the whole of Brittany you are a virgin, not in these civilised times. But I should tell you, it would have been the first time in all my married lives I could have shown my interested tenants such a flag. Then I realised, with a shock of surprise, how it must have been my innocence that captivated him. The silent music, he said, of my unknowingness, like La Terrasse des Audiences or Clair de Lune, played upon a piano with keys of ether. You must remember how ill at ease I was in that luxurious place, how unease had been my constant companion during the whole length of my courtship by this grave satyr who now gently martyrised my hair. To know that my naivety gave him some pleasure made me take heart. Courage! I shall act the fine lady to the manner born one day, if only by virtue of default. Then, slowly yet teasingly, as if he were giving a child a great mysterious treat, he took out a bunch of keys from some interior hidey-hole in his jacket. Key after key, a key, he said, for every lock in the house, keys of all kinds, huge ancient things of black iron, others slender, delicate, almost baroque, wafer-thin Yale keys for safes and boxes, and, during his absence, it was I who must take care of them all. I eyed the heavy bunch with circumspection. Until that moment, I had not given a single thought to the practical aspects of marriage with a great house, great wealth, a great man whose keyring was as crowded as that of a prison warder. Here were the clumsy and archaic keys for dungeons we had in plenty, although they had been converted into cellars for his wines. The dusty bottles inhabited in racks, all those deep holes of pain in the rock on which the castle was built. These are the keys to the kitchens. This is the key to the picture gallery, a treasure house filled by 5 centuries of avid collectors. Ah, he foresaw I would spend hours there. He had amply indulged his taste for the symbolists, he told me with a glint of greed. There was Moreau's great portrait of his first wife, the famous sacrificial victim with the imprint of the lace-like chains on her pellucid skin. Did I know the story of the painting of that picture? How, when she took off her clothes for him for the first time, she, fresh from her bar in Montmartre, she had robed herself involuntarily in a blush that reddened her breasts, her shoulders, her arms, her whole body? He had thought of that story, of that dear girl, when he had first undressed me. Ensor, the great Ensor, his monolithic canvas, the foolish virgins. 2 or 3 late Gauguins, his special favourite, the one of the tranced brown girl in the deserted house, which was called Out of the Night We Come, Into the Night We Go. And, besides the additions he had made himself, his marvellous inheritance of Watteaus, Poussins, and a pair of very special Fragonards, commissioned for a licentious ancestor who, it was said, had posed for the master's brush himself with his own 2 daughters. He broke off his catalogue of treasures abruptly. Your thin white face, chérie, he said, as if he saw it for the first time. Your thin white face, with its promise of debauchery only a connoisseur could detect. A log fell in the fire, instigating a shower of sparks. The opal on my finger spurted green flame. I felt as giddy as if I were on the edge of a precipice. I was afraid, not so much of him, of his monstrous presence, heavy as if he had been gifted at birth with more specific gravity than the rest of us, the presence that, even when I thought myself most in love with him, always subtly oppressed me. No, I was not afraid of him, but of myself. I seemed reborn in his unreflective eyes, reborn in unfamiliar shapes. I hardly recognised myself from his descriptions of me, and yet, might there not be a grain of beastly truth in them? And, in the red firelight, I blushed again, unnoticed, to think he might have chosen me, because, In my innocence, he sensed a rare talent for corruption. Here is the key to the china cabinet. Don't laugh, my darling. There's a king's ransom in Sèvres in that closet and a queen's ransom in Limoges. And a key to the locked, barred room where 5 generations of plate were kept. Keys, keys, keys. He would trust me with the keys to his office, although I was only a baby, and the keys to his safes, where he kept the jewels I should wear, he promised me, when we returned to Paris. Such jewels! Why, I would be able to change my earrings and necklaces 3 times a day, just as the Empress Josephine used to change her underwear. He doubted, he said, with that hollow, knocking sound that served him for a chuckle, I would be quite so interested in his share certificates, although they, of course, were worth infinitely more. Outside our firelit privacy, I could hear the sound of the tide drawing back from the pebbles of the foreshore. It was nearly time for him to leave me. One single key remained unaccounted for on the ring, and he hesitated over it. For a moment, I thought he was going to unfasten it from its brothers, slip it back into his pocket and take it away with him. "What is that key?" I demanded, for his chaffing had made me bold. "The key to your heart? Give it me!" He dangled the key tantalisingly above my head, out of reach of my straining fingers. Those bare red lips of his cracked sidelong into a smile. "Ah, no," he said. "Not the key to my heart. Rather the key to my enfer." He left it on the ring, fastened the ring together, shook it musically like a carillon, then threw the keys in a jingling heap in my lap. I could feel the cold metal chilling my thighs through my thin muslin frock. He bent over me to drop a beard-masked kiss on my forehead. "Every man must have one secret, even if only one, from his wife," he said. "Promise me this, my wave-faced piano player. Promise me you'll use all the keys on the ring, except that last little one I showed you. Play with anything you find, jewels, silver plate. Make toy boats of my share certificates if it pleases you, and send them sailing off to America after me. All is yours. Everywhere is open to you, except the lock that this single key fits. Yet all it is the key to a little room at the foot of the West Tower, behind the still room, at the end of a dark little corridor full of horrid cobwebs that would get into your hair and frighten you if you ventured there. Oh, and you'd find it such a dull little room, but you must promise me, if you love me, to leave it well alone. It is only a private study, a hideaway, a den, as the English say, where I can go sometimes. On those frequent yet inevitable occasions when the yoke of marriage seems to weigh too heavily on my shoulders. There I can go, you understand, to savour the rare pleasure of imagining myself wifeless. There was a little thin starlight in the courtyard as, wrapped in my furs, I saw him to his car. His last words were that he had telephoned the mainland and taken a piano tuner onto the staff. This man would arrive to take up his duties the next day. He pressed me to his vicuña breast once and then drove away. I had drowsed away that afternoon, and now I could not sleep. I lay tossing and turning in his ancestral bed until another daybreak discoloured the dozen mirrors that were iridescent with the reflections of the sea. The perfume of the lilies weighed on my senses. When I thought that, henceforth, I would always share these sheets with a man whose skin, as theirs did, contained that toad-like, clammy hint of moisture, I felt a vague desolation that, within me, now my female wound had healed, there had awoken a certain queasy craving, like the cravings of pregnant women for the taste of coal or chalk or tainted food, for the renewal of his caresses. Had he not hinted to me, in his flesh as in his speech and looks, of the thousand baroque intersections of flesh upon flesh? I lay in our wide bed accompanied by a sleepless companion, my dark, newborn curiosity. I lay in bed alone, and I longed for him, and he disgusted me. Were there jewels enough in all his safes to recompense me for this predicament? Did all that castle hold enough riches to recompense me for the company of the libertine with whom I must share it? And what, precisely, was the nature of my desirous dread for this mysterious being who, to show his mastery over me, had abandoned me on my wedding night? Then I sat straight up in bed, under the sardonic masks of the gargoyles carved above me, riven by a wild surmise. Might he have left me, not for Wall Street, but for an importunate mistress tucked away God knows where, who knew how to pleasure him far better than a girl whose fingers had been exercised hitherto only by the practice of scales and arpeggios? And, slowly, soothed, I sank back onto the heaping pillows. I acknowledged that the jealous scare I'd just given myself was not unmixed with a little tincture of relief. At last I drifted into slumber, as daylight filled the room and chased bad dreams away. But the last thing I remembered before I slept was the tall jar of lilies beside the bed. How the thick glass distorted their fat stems so they looked like arms, dismembered arms drifting drowned in greenish water. Coffee and croissant to console this bridal solitary waking. Delicious. Honey, too, and a section of comb on a glass saucer. The maid squeezed the aromatic juice from an orange into a chilled goblet while I watched her as I lay in the lazy midday bed of the rich. Yet nothing, this morning, gave me more than a fleeting pleasure, except to hear that the piano tuner had been at work already. When the maid told me that, I sprang out of bed and pulled on my old serge skirt and flannel blouse, costume of a student in which I felt far more at ease with myself than in any of my fine new clothes. After my 3 hours of practice, I called the piano tuner in to thank him. He was blind, of course, but young, with a gentle mouth and grey eyes that fixed upon me although they could not see me. He was a blacksmith's son from the village across the causeway, a chorister in the church whom the good priest had taught a trade so that he could make a living. Almost satisfactory. Yes, he thought he would be happy here, and if, he added shyly, he might sometimes be allowed to hear me play, for you see, he loved music. Yes, of course, I said, certainly. He seemed to know that I had smiled. After I dismissed him, even though I'd woken so late, it was still barely time for my 5 o'clock. The housekeeper, who, thoughtfully forewarned by my husband, had restrained herself from interrupting my music, now made me a solemn visitation with a lengthy menu for a late luncheon. When I told her I did not need it, she looked at me obliquely, along her nose. I understood at once that one of my principal functions as chatelaine was to provide work for the staff. But, all the same, I asserted myself and said I would wait until dinner time, although I looked forward nervously to the solitary meal. Then I found I had to tell her what I would like to have prepared for me. My imagination, still that of a schoolgirl, ran riot. A fowl in cream. Or should I anticipate Christmas with a varnished turkey? No, I have decided. Avocado and shrimp, lots of it, followed by no entree at all. But surprise me for dessert, with every ice cream in the box. She noted all down, but sniffed. I'd shocked her. Such tastes! Child that I was, I giggled when she left me. But now, what shall I do now? I could have spent a happy hour unpacking the trunks that contained my trousseau, but the maid had done that already. The dresses, the tailor-mades hung in the wardrobe in my dressing room, the hats on wooden heads to keep their shape, the shoes on wooden feet, as if all these inanimate objects were imitating the appearance of life to mock me. I did not like to linger in my overcrowded dressing room, nor in my lugubriously lily-scented bedroom. How shall I pass the time? I shall take a bath in my own bathroom, and found the taps were little dolphins made of gold, with chips of turquoise for eyes. And there was a tank of goldfish, who swam in and out of moving fronds of weeds, as bored, I thought, as I was. How I wished he had not left me. How I wished it were possible to chat with, say, a maid or the piano tuner. But I knew already my new rank forbade overtures of friendship to the staff. I had been hoping to defer the call as long as I could, so that I should have something to look forward to in the dead waste of time I foresaw before me after my dinner was done with. But at 7:15, when darkness already surrounded the castle, I could contain myself no longer. I telephoned my mother, and astonished myself by bursting into tears when I heard her voice. "No, nothing was the matter, Mother. I have gold bath taps. I said gold bath taps. No, I suppose that's nothing to cry about, Mother." The line was bad. I could hardly make out her congratulations, her questions, her concern, but I was a little comforted when I put the receiver down. Yet there still remained 1 whole hour to dinner, and the whole unimaginable desert of the rest of the evening. The bunch of keys lay, where he had left them, on the rug before the library fire, which had warmed their metal, so that they no longer felt cold to the touch but warm, almost as my own skin. How careless I was! A maid tending to the logs eyed me reproachfully, as if I'd set a trap for her as I picked up the clinking bundle of keys, the keys to the interior doors of this lovely prison of which I was both the inmate and the mistress, and had scarcely seen. When I remembered that, I felt the exhilaration of the explorer. Lights! More lights! At the touch of a switch, the dreaming library was brilliantly illuminated. I ran crazily about the castle, switching on every light I could find. I ordered the servants to light up all their quarters too, so the castle would shine like a sea-born birthday cake lit with 1,000 candles, one for every year of its life, and everybody on the shore would wonder at it. When everything was lit as brightly as the café and the Gare du Nord, the significance of the possessions implied by that bunch of keys no longer intimidated me, for I was determined now to search through them all for evidence of my husband's true nature. His office first, evidently. A mahogany desk 1/2 mile wide, with an impeccable blotter and a bank of telephones. I allowed myself the luxury of opening the safe that contained the jewellery and delved sufficiently among the leather boxes to find out how my marriage had given me access to a djinn's treasury. Parures, bracelets, rings. While I was thus surrounded by diamonds, a maid knocked on the door and entered before I spoke, a subtle discourtesy. I would speak to my husband about it. She eyed my serge skirt superciliously. Did Madame plan to dress for dinner? She made a moue of disdain when I laughed to hear that. She was far more the lady than I. But imagine, to dress up in one of my Poiret extravaganzas with the jewelled turban and aigrette on my head, roped with pearl to the navel, to sit down all alone in the baronial dining hall at the head of that massive board at which King Mark was reputed to have fed his knights. I grew calmer under the cold eye of her disapproval. I adopted the crisp inflections of an officer's daughter. No, I would not dress for dinner. Furthermore, I was not hungry enough for dinner itself. She must tell the housekeeper to cancel the dormitory feast I'd ordered. Could they leave me sandwiches and a flask of coffee in my music room, and would they all dismiss for the night? Mais oui, madame. I knew by her bereft intonation I had let them down again, but I did not care. I was armed against them by the brilliance of his hoard. But I would not find his heart amongst the glittering stones. As soon as she had gone, I began a systematic search of the drawers of his desk. All was in order, so I found nothing. Not a random doodle on an old envelope, nor the faded photograph of a woman. Only the files of business correspondence, the bills from the home farms, the invoices from tailors, the billets doux from international financiers. Nothing. And this absence of the evidence of his real life began to impress me strangely. There must, I thought, be a great deal to conceal if he takes such pains to hide it. His office was a singularly impersonal room, facing inwards onto the courtyard, as though he wanted to turn his back on the Siren Sea in order to keep a clear head while he bankrupted a small businessman in Amsterdam or, I noticed with a thrill of disdain, engaged in some business in Laos that must, from certain cryptic references to his amateur botanist's enthusiasm for rare poppies, be to do with opium. Was he not rich enough to do without crime? Or was the crime itself his profit? And yet I saw enough to appreciate his zeal for secrecy. Now I had ransacked his desk, I must spend a cool-headed quarter of an hour putting every last letter back where I had found it, and, as I covered the traces of my visit, by some chance, as I reached inside a little drawer that had stuck fast, I must have touched a hidden spring, for a secret door flew open within that drawer itself. And this secret drawer contained, at last, a file marked personal. I was alone, but for my reflection in the uncurtained window. I had the brief notion that his heart, pressed flat as a flower, crimson and thin as tissue paper, lay in this file. It was a very thin one. I could have wished, perhaps, I had not found that touching ill-spelt note on a paper napkin marked La Coupole that began, "My darling, I cannot wait for the moment when you make me yours completely." The diva had sent him a page of the score of Tristan, the Liebestod, with the single cryptic word, "until," scrawled across it. But the strangest of all these love letters was a postcard with a view of a village graveyard, among mountains, where some black-coated ghoul enthusiastically dug at a grave. This little scene, executed with the lurid exuberance of Grand Guignol, was captioned, "Typical Transylvanian scene, midnight, All Hallows." And, on the other side, the message, "On the occasion of this marriage to the descendant of Dracula, Always remember, the supreme and unique pleasure of love is the certainty that one is doing evil. Toute amitié. C. A joke. A joke in the worst possible taste, for had he not been married to a Romanian countess? And then I remembered her pretty, witty face and her name, Carmilla. My most recent predecessor in this castle had been, it would seem, the most sophisticated. I put away the file, sobered. Nothing in my life of family love and music had prepared me for these grown-up games, and yet these were clues to his self that showed me, at least, how much he had been loved, even if they did not reveal any good reason for it. But I wanted to know still more, and, as I closed the office door and locked it, the means to discover more fell in my way. Fell indeed, and with the clatter of a dropped canteen of cutlery, for, as I turned the slick Yale lock, I contrived somehow to open up the keyring itself so that all the keys tumbled loose on the floor. And the very first key I picked out of that pile was, as luck or ill fortune had it, the key to the room he had forbidden me, the room he would keep for his own, so that he could go there when he wished to feel himself once more a bachelor. I made my decision to explore it before I felt a faint resurgence of my ill-defined fear of his waxen stillness. Perhaps I half imagined then that I might find his real self in his den, waiting there to see if I indeed had obeyed him, that he had sent a moving figure of himself to New York, the enigmatic, self-sustaining carapace of his public persona, while the real man, whose face I had glimpsed in the storm of orgasm, occupied himself with pressing private business in the study at the foot of the West Tower behind the still room. Yet, if that were so, it was imperative that I should find him, should know him, and I was too deluded by his apparent taste for me to think my disobedience might truly offend him. I took the forbidden key from the heap and left the others lying there. It was now very late, and the castle was adrift, as far as it could go from the land, in the middle of the silent ocean where, at my orders, it floated like a garland of light. And all silent, all still, but for the murmuring of the waves. I felt no fear, no intimation of dread. Now I walked as firmly as I had done in my mother's house. Not a narrow, dusty little passage at all. Why had he lied to me? But an ill-lit one, certainly. The electricity, for some reason, did not extend here, so I retreated to the still room and found a bundle of waxed tapers in a cupboard, stored there with matches to light the oak board at the grand dinners. I put a match to my little taper and advanced with it in my hand, like a penitent, along the corridor hung with heavy, I think Venetian, tapestries. The flame picked out, here the head of a man, there the rich breast of a woman spilling through a rent in her dress. The rape of the Sabines, perhaps? The naked swords and immolated horses suggested some grisly mythological subject. The corridor wound downwards. There was an almost imperceptible ramp to the thickly carpeted floor. The heavy hangings on the wall muffled my footsteps, even my breathing. For some reason, it grew very warm. The sweat sprang out in beads on my brow. I could no longer hear the sound of the sea. A long, winding corridor, as if I were in the viscera of the castle. And this corridor led to a door of worm-eaten oak, low, round-topped, barred with black iron. And still I felt no fear. No raising of the hairs on the back of the neck, no prickling of the thumbs. The key slid into the new lock as easily as a hot knife into butter. No fear, but a hesitation, a holding of the spiritual breath. If I had found some traces of his heart in a file marked personal, perhaps here, in his subterranean privacy, I might find a little of his soul. It was the consciousness of the possibility of such a discovery, of its possible strangeness, that kept me for a moment motionless before, in the foolhardiness of my already subtly tainted innocence, I turned the key and the door creaked slowly back. I hope you enjoyed this decadent adaptation, and if you'd like to know where it all began, if you'd like to become better acquainted with Bluebeard and his origins, listen to my reading of Charles Perrault's 1697 classic, La Barbe Bleue, which translates to Bluebeard, by clicking here next.